It had been far too long since I'd broken free from the shackles of the daily grind. The relentless demands of work, the ceaseless flow of emails and deadlines, it was all becoming too much. I craved an escape, a way to disconnect from the stress and chaos of city life. And so, I decided to embark on a camping trip into the remote wilderness of the Rocky Mountains. This had been a dream of mine for years, and finally, it was coming true. I yearned for days filled with adventure, hiking through dense forests, fishing in glistening streams, and spending nights stargazing by the crackling campfire. The thought of the tranquility and serenity of nature was enough to recharge my weary soul, and I had high expectations for what lay ahead. When I finally arrived at the secluded campsite nestled beside a babbling mountain creek, it felt like I'd stepped into a different world. The sun beamed through the dense trees, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and earth. I pitched my tent at the edge of the forest, overlooking an open field with majestic mountains in the backdrop. It was an idyllic setting, far removed from the concrete jungle I'd left behind. As I set up my tent, I noticed something peculiar, a deep impression in the mud at the edge of the creek. It was large and appeared to be a print of a massive claw. The idea of wild creatures in the vicinity filled me with both excitement and humility. I realized I was in the territory of nature and would need to stay vigilant. The first day of my camping adventure dawned, and I was brimming with energy and anticipation. I set off on a hike along a winding trail that led deeper into the forest. The surrounding trees cast cooling shadows, and the sound of running water grew louder as I ventured further. I felt like I was the only person in the world, surrounded by the serene beauty of nature. After a few hours of hiking, I decided to stop at a clear mountain spring to quench my thirst. I crouched down by the cold, babbling water and dipped my hands in. As I looked up, my gaze fell once more on an imprint in the mud at the spring's edge. This time, it was larger and deeper, with sharp claw marks. My heart rate quickened, and adrenaline surged through my veins. This was unmistakably the track of a bear, and it was fresh. I stood up, scanning my surroundings, and noticed that the trail continued uphill into the mountains. Curiosity urged me on, and I followed the increasingly steep path. I heard the rustling of leaves, the calls of birds, and the occasional crack in the distance. The wilderness was teeming with life, and I felt at one with nature. Then, in the distance, I heard a sound that sent chills down my spine. A deep, rumbling growl, low and menacing, sliced through the silence. The sound seemed to emanate from a point further ahead in the woods, and it was drawing nearer. I couldn't believe my ears. I knew this growl didn't belong to a small animal. It was something large, something powerful. I halted, listening intently, my eyes fixed on the source of the sound. The forest had fallen eerily silent, as if nature itself was holding its breath. A shiver ran down my spine as the growl grew louder, closer, and I realized that this was one of those moments where in the wilderness I was no longer the dominant species. The growl intensified and became more menacing, and I could now hear the heavy breathing of the creature. Panic welled up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. The last thing I wanted to do was provoke the animal. I decided to slowly retreat, putting distance between myself and the source of the sound, heading back towards my camp. As I carefully backed away, I kept my focus on the noise coming from the bushes. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to determine its origin. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the creature stepped out of the shadows and revealed itself. It was a bear, a massive grizzly bear, its fur dark and gleaming in the scant light filtering through the trees. Its claws were impressive, its muscles rippled beneath its thick coat as it moved. It didn't seem to fear my presence, and that made the situation all the more terrifying. I knew I was in a perilous predicament. A confrontation with a bear was the last thing I wanted, so I began to cautiously back away, keeping my eyes fixed on the bear's dark form. It was in moments like these that you realize just how small and vulnerable a human can be in the wild. My heart raced as I continued to back away from the bear, my mind racing for a way to escape this situation. The bear's eyes locked onto mine, and its growls grew more ominous. I knew that I had to act quickly if I wanted to avoid a potentially deadly confrontation. I fumbled for my backpack, my hands shaking with fear and adrenaline. My eyes darted around, searching for any possible means of escape. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees towering like ancient sentinels, and the bear's hulking figure blocking my path back to camp. With my backpack in hand, I knew that my best chance was to climb a tree. I had heard that grizzly bears were not the best climbers, and I hoped that if I could reach the safety of the branches, the bear would lose interest and eventually wander off. I scanned the nearby trees, searching for one that was sturdy enough to support my weight. My heart sank as I realized that most of the trees in the immediate area were either too small or too flimsy to provide a safe haven. The bear was getting closer, and I could see its massive form moving steadily in my direction. Panic threatened to overtake me as I continued to search for a suitable tree. Finally, I spotted a tall pine tree with thick branches that reached out like welcoming arms. Without hesitation, I sprinted towards it, my backpack bouncing heavily on my shoulders. As I reached the tree, I threw my backpack to the ground and began to climb with every ounce of strength in my body. The rough bark scraped against my hands, and I could feel the muscles in my arms burning with effort. The bear's growls were now just a few feet away, and I knew that I was running out of time. I reached a sturdy branch about 15 feet off the ground and pulled myself up onto it. I glanced down and saw the bear standing at the base of the tree, its head tilted back as it let out a deafening roar. The sound was enough to send shivers down my spine, but I knew that I had made the right choice by seeking refuge in the tree. For what felt like hours, I clung to the branch, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched the bear pace anxiously below. Its massive form blocked out the moonlight, casting an eerie shadow that danced across the forest floor. The bear's roars echoed through the woods, a bone-chilling reminder of the danger I was in. I tried to control my breathing, but fear gripped me like a vice. My palms were slick with sweat, making it difficult to maintain my grip on the branch. I knew that I couldn't stay in the tree forever, and eventually the bear would lose patience or curiosity and leave. But as the minutes turned into hours, it became clear that the bear had no intention of backing down. The night wore on, and exhaustion began to set in. My muscles ached from the strain of holding onto the branch, and the cold mountain air cut through my clothing. I shivered uncontrollably, and the fear that had initially propelled me into the tree now threatened to paralyze me. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, I realized that I couldn't stay in the tree indefinitely. I needed a plan, a way to safely descend and make my way back to camp without alerting the bear to my presence. With trembling hands, I reached into my backpack and retrieved a small bottle of water and a granola bar. I needed sustenance to regain my strength and make rational decisions. I took small sips of water and forced myself to eat a few bites of the granola bar, all the while keeping a wary eye on the bear below. It seemed to have calmed down somewhat, its roars less frequent and less intense. Perhaps it was growing bored or had decided that I was no longer a threat. Taking a deep breath, I carefully lowered myself down to a lower branch, testing my weight on the slender limb. It held, and I slowly descended further until I was just a few feet from the ground. The bear was still nearby, but it seemed less interested in me now, its attention drawn to a nearby berry bush. I waited for a moment when the bear's back was turned before making my move. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled energy, I dropped to the ground and took off running in the direction of my camp. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed my tired legs to their limits, my backpack bouncing heavily on my shoulders. I could hear the bear's heavy footsteps behind me, and I knew that it was giving chase. Fear fueled my sprint, and I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning with each breath. The campsite was within sight, and I could see my tent in the distance. With one final burst of energy, I reached the campsite and dove into the safety of my tent, zipping it shut behind me. I could hear the bear snuffling around outside, its massive form casting a shadow over the tent. My heart raced as I held my breath, praying that the bear would lose interest and leave. Minutes felt like hours as I lay in the darkness of the tent, listening to the sounds of the wilderness around me. Gradually, the bear's presence receded, and the forest grew quiet once more. It seemed that I had eluded the bear, at least for the time being. Exhausted and shaken, I stayed in my tent for the remainder of the day, too afraid to venture outside. I replayed the harrowing encounter with the bear in my mind, each moment etched in vivid detail. I knew that I had been incredibly lucky to escape unscathed, and I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't found that tree in time. As night fell once more, I ventured out of the tent cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of the bear. The campfire had burned down to embers, and the forest was cloaked in darkness. I knew that I couldn't stay in the wilderness forever, and I needed to pack up and make my way back to civilization. With a heightened sense of awareness, I packed up my camp and began the trek back to the trailhead. Every rustle of leaves and every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me, but I pushed forward, determined to put the terrifying encounter behind me. Hours later, I emerged from the wilderness, my heart heavy with a mixture of relief and gratitude. I had survived a dangerous encounter with a bear, and I had learned a valuable lesson about the unforgiving power of nature. As I drove away from the Rocky Mountains, I couldn't help but reflect on the fragility of human existence in the wild and the importance of respecting the natural world. My great wilderness escape had turned into a harrowing ordeal, a reminder that even in the most serene and beautiful of places, danger can lurk just around the corner. But despite the fear and the uncertainty, I knew that I would forever cherish the memories of that adventure, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring allure of the untamed wilderness.